So I received an email the other day and from a former student. The student asked me if I would write a recommendation letter. And the student said they've been trying to get interviews with, for different positions with different jobs, and they weren't able to land the interview. Well, they're not even getting a call back. And so they also asked me if I had any tips on how or what to do in terms of landing an interview. And I said, of course. But my approach is, to landing that interview is a bit, unconventional. I'm not that guy who will, go online to maybe a Monster or whatever and just fill out an application and hope, someone reaches out to me. So the first tip I recommended to my former student was to be creative. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I remember in 2005, I was trying to land a job with Cumulus Broadcasting. Now, I'm in the Houston area, and there's a radio station, 104 KRBE. Now, I've done some research, and on average, this radio station actually gets, for the position I was going for, which was an account executive, about 200 applications a month. So what can you say? The competition is steep. So what I decided to do was to be creative and to differentiate myself from the crowd. So the first thing that I did was to say, okay, well, how can I do this? So I decided to gift wrap my resume. Yeah, I know this sounds crazy, but my whole thing is about being different and differentiating yourself from the pack, because, you look at, the job applicants for that particular job at that time, it was all stellar. People had been in the industry for a while, but what makes it even more, I'm not going to say impressive, because I'm not saying that I'm trying to be impressive, but what makes it more stand outish is the fact that I'd actually been out of radio for a good, 4 or 5 years, and I wanted to get back into radio. So I definitely had to make myself different from all those people who were applying for the job. And so I gift wrapped my resume. I actually did that for Cumulus Broadcasting as well as Radio 1, and got the interview. I landed the interview both times, and subsequently I went on to work for Cumulus Broadcasting. And so, yeah, that's it. Be creative, differentiate yourself, and be sure that you can add value. So the second thing I told the student was to do your research and match your skill set with that research. Part of what I did to not just land the interview, but to actually get the job with Cumulus was I basically looked at their 10K, looked at their financials, looked at the overall health of the company, and what I did was I started looking for problems, looking for issues that they were having. And so what I did was, when I wrote my cover letter, inside of that gift wrap package, I actually included some information about the issues that they were having, and I spelled out very specifically how my skill set, my talent can actually help them alleviate that problem. In other words, I identified their pain point, and I showed them how, if they hired me, that I would be able to help them rid themselves of that problem. Hey, and the third thing I did to land the interview, and I know those responsible for hiring will not necessarily like this, but sometimes you have to take the path of least resistance. Case in point, as I told you before, in the case of getting the job with Cumulus Broadcasting, I took the path of least resistance. Now, like I said, I did my research, put that information in my cover letter. But the path of least resistance was not necessarily about going directly to the source, which is the hiring person at the radio station at the time. But what I did in the case of Radio 1, I went over, the sales manager was doing the hiring, I went to the operations manager. So I literally showed up with a gift wrap resume, small resume in a big box, right? And I left it for the operations manager. So what happened within 24 hours, when the operations manager, and he told me about this later, opened the package, thought that there was such a creative way to get their attention, especially considering I was going for a job, an account executive that dealt with big clients such as Apple, Wrigley's, etc. They needed someone, and they wanted to hire someone that was very creative when it came to marketing. So the general sales manager who was actually doing the hiring didn't know anything about the package. But since it went directly to the guy who was running the show, when he saw this, he relayed the message to the general sales manager, hey, you have to interview this guy. As you know, I said I ended up taking a job at Cumulus as opposed to Radio One. But the truth of the matter is this. You have to sometimes circumvent the normal paths, which is a lot of static in those paths, to land the interview. Now, again, I know a lot of you out there responsible for hiring may not necessarily like this, skipping that chain of command, but sometimes it works. So in a nutshell, 1, you have to be creative. 2, you have to do your research. And 3, you have to take the path of least resistance. And those are my 3 creative ways on how I've landed many interviews in the past. And that's the advice I gave to the student.